For years. I'm so excited to be here. Look at this turnout, it's fantastic. It's great to be in Virginia, which is part of America, where you recognize the Second Amendment. I came from DC this morning, which is not part of America, because they don't recognize the Second Amendment. Making small, incremental progress to get there. As I know, some of you have heard my story before, but I never shot a gun before just 3 years ago, and I really had no interest in guns. I became interested, not so much in guns, but in defending myself when I was in DC, and I was taking care of a friend's dog and walked into a burglary in action. And it ended up there were about 15 men staking out the house, and I was alone, and thank God I wasn't physically hurt. They just robbed me. But it really shook me up, because I hadn't quite realized that the street crime could be inside. And for the first time in my life that night, as I was going to bed after the police had fingerprinted, and they actually did a pretty legitimate job in trying to find these guys, that night going to bed, I thought for the first time, I wish I had a gun. I wish I had a gun on the night table so I could defend myself if these guys come back tonight or another night. And so then I thought I'll just get a gun. Famous last words in Washington, D.C. Now here, obviously in Virginia, you guys want a gun, you want another gun, you go to the gun store, you fill out your form, you pass the federal check if you're not a felon or a drug addict or dangerously mentally ill or all those things. You walk out, you pay for your gun, and you go about your life, protecting yourself, and hopefully never have to use it except for in training, and you're fine. Well, DC's not like that. DC has a registry law, so the government needs to know who has what gun, every gun they want to know about. So I started going through this process in DC to get a gun, and I had to take a test. I had to take a written test. I had to take a 5-hour class. By the way, still don't have a gun, just trying to get a gun. And I had to fill out forms, and I had to go to the police station 4 times, and I had to get fingerprinted, and I had to get photographed. And finally, after 4 months and $435 in fines and fees and class responsibilities, I finally was able to take my gun home. That's it. Home. Which is great if the burglars come back inside and want to rape and kill me. I can defend myself at home. That's all I wanted. And then I thought about it. Well, the chances of being attacked outside the home in DC are a lot higher than being attacked inside the home. Then I realized for 4 months and $435, I'd earned back the right of the Second Amendment right to defend myself inside the home, but outside the home, I was still a sitting duck. Then things progressed a little bit further. So that's where I sort of stood for the last year. And I think a lot of you read this in my book, Emily Gets Her Gun, and I talked about that, and how these gun laws, DC has all the gun laws, gun control laws that exist in the country. Basically, DC just scanned the country and took all of them, put them in DC, and it's done nothing for crime. It's a perfect example of why gun control laws don't work. Quite simply, gun control laws don't work because criminals don't care what the laws are, because they're criminals. If they cared about the laws, they'd be us. And we keep our guns to protect ourselves and not hurt anyone or commit crimes.
I missed her when she was at VCDL last time.
Repeatedly, yes. Every time there's any kind of mass shooting, every time there's any kind of gun crime, people think more laws. And so that's what they've done in DC. They've scanned the country. If there's a law, they have taken it into DC. So, and now we have a new mayor, Muriel Bowser, who openly says, I hate guns, and I'm going to do everything short of violating the Constitution to prevent them. That's what she says. Okay. So that's what we're dealing with, that kind of mentality. As absolutely zero awareness that guns are used millions of times a year for defense. That's primarily why they're used. And the reason people own guns is to protect themselves, not commit crimes. Complete misconception in the DC political scene and a lot of the mainstream media, which I'm a part of, but obviously a little bit different than most of my colleagues. But I'll tell you, I decided I'd hoped one day to live in America and protect myself outside the home. And people said move to Virginia. People always say that to me. Why don't you just move to Virginia? It's so close. And I say to them, and it's true, I say to you, I think it's great how you all live here, and you live much safer than I do. But for me, it's not just about me, my personal safety. It's about the fact that you shouldn't have to move for your constitutional rights to be recognized.
I like how she said.
It's the United States of America. part of the Constitution, every amendment in the Bill of Rights has to be recognized on every foot of ground in this country. We can't just be moving around to get rights recognized. So I'm staying in D.C. Now, I might be old and gray by the time they decide to recognize the Second Amendment, but that's the reason I don't move to Virginia. Now, things got a little bit, progress was made. George Linus here is one of the plaintiffs in the Palmer case, which came to court, came around this, I obviously don't need a speech that I wrote, which came this summer. A district court judge ruled that DC's laws banning all carry. Now, DC was the last place in the country banned all carry. Illinois was the last state. About, I think it was 2 years ago, the appeals court said they can't do that anymore. And now they have a pretty lenient, or I would say American, concealed carry laws in Illinois. But DC consisted on this no carry. And when I say no carry, I mean no one. Not like Maryland, where it's, you sort of at least can apply. DC doesn't even let you apply. So this judge ruled this summer in the Palmer case that's unconstitutional. DC's reaction to that. First, they're going to appeal it. Absolutely. Secondly, they passed a law that they copied Maryland's law and basically made it virtually impossible to get a carry permit. Well, at least you could apply. So I thought, I'm going to apply. I don't know if you've seen my series on Fox 5 I've been doing about this, about what it takes to apply for a gun carry permit in D.C. And for those of you who have asked, I'm still waiting. But I went down to the police station, the same office where I've been registering my gun, and said, here, what does it take? What do I have to do to apply for this carry permit? And they said, well, let me make a few things clear, Miss Miller. They know me well down there. Or Emily, actually, they call me. So, a few things clear. You can't just, you don't just get a carry permit. You had to apply. I'm like, okay. And then they said, remember, and then Chief Lanier decides who gets it. I'm like, okay, that's not so good for me. Chief Lanier not being a huge fan of mine. And then they said, and also remember, you can't get it because there's crime in D.C. And actually, it specifically says on the application, living in a high crime area is not justification for getting a carry permit. I said, okay, so being raped and murdered on the streets of D.C. doesn't count as a reason. And they're like, hey, Emily, you need a special danger. I said, a special danger as opposed to a danger? What makes it special? And they're like, well, it makes it special if you're targeted. And I said, well, was I targeted in the past? Well, if you've already been injured, shot, or stabbed or raped, that's special. But you'd have to prove it with hospital reports, obviously, or your death certificate. Or you're about to get killed, murdered. I'm like, well, most of the criminals in D.C. don't send notice before they do this. They just kind of jump on you. Well, no. You need a special danger. So I said to the man, and this is on our station, on our website still, I said, so the Second Amendment that says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, is that just not recognized here? And he said, well, that was written back when the British were coming.
I saw a video. Yeah. I laughed.
Well, first I thought, I'm like, oh, I have a good story on air for TV because it's on camera. But then I thought, well, it actually technically wasn't written when the British were coming. It was after they're gone, even though, historically wrong. But, there is this mentality that the Constitution is this old document. It doesn't really count anymore. Well, it actually, as you all know, it's actually a living, breathing document that is just as important today as it's ever been. Probably more important than ever. And the purpose of it was to prevent a tyrannical government, and the one that I'm fighting to get this carry permit from. So anyway, the British aren't coming. I had to come up with my special dangers. And so I actually, as in my job itself, have special dangers. I think they're kind of special. They're special enough. So I came back with this application. I went to the police station, got my police reports. I had 2 police reports. One was a threatening letter, I won't get into too specifics, but it's scary. And another one was a phone call threatening my life, anonymous phone call. And I'd filed police reports on both of these. And obviously, in the public eye, you get a lot of unwanted. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, yeah, exactly. Bloomberg. And then finally, which is unfortunately, sadly, come to bear fruit is that FBI sent our station and all media outlets in October notice that there is a terrorist group, I won't say which one, actively targeting journalists, in fact, TV journalists, media, and that media outlets should take special precautions for extra security for journalists and warn them. And I use that as a very special danger. That is quite special. And I sent that application in, and then unfortunately, sadly, devastatingly, we saw in Paris that terrorists are targeting journalists, and this just horrendous scene of 12 journalists at Charlie Hebdo shot and killed for their free speech, and all of them unarmed. And I think probably for me the most upsetting, I think for a lot of us, the most upsetting part was seeing that poor unarmed police officer responding, first responder, going to the scene and having his hand up in a surrender position because he didn't have a gun and being shot in the head. And I think all of us who live in America, and thankfully our police officers are all armed, look at that as just, this is, how about gun control they have in Europe? They don't have these kind of rights, and they don't have these kinds of beliefs, and that's the kind of things that happen. And I'll tell you, most of as you all know, most of mainstream media is anti-gun, as they call it. And my phone, my email lit up that day from colleagues or people walking around my desk or phone numbers from journalists. Emily, how do you register a gun? How do you get a gun permit? Where do you buy a gun? How did you learn how to get a gun? Because suddenly it was real. And if you're a victim of a crime, a gun is to protect yourself and defend yourself, and that's where it starts and that's where it ends. I mean, ultimately the Founding Fathers wrote the Second Amendment for a tyrannical government, but it's also so all of us can just, quite frankly, defend ourselves. And, well, I'm still waiting, by the way, so Chief Lanier has 90 days to make a decision if my danger is special enough to let me bear arms. We don't know yet. I don't know how that's going to turn out. I think ultimately whatever happens in my case is not that important, but what happens in the courts will make that decision. I predict, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but I predict that the Kerry case, Dick Heller is here. Yay, Dick Heller is here. And I should have started out by saying that the only reason I could, after I was burglarized and I wanted to get a gun, the only reason I was allowed to get a gun is because of this man's fight to the Supreme Court, and forced the Supreme Court recognize our right to at least own a gun, keep our arms, and it's because of Dick Heller. And I do think, and George Lyon is standing with me, one of the plaintiffs in the Palmer case, I think it's going to take the Supreme Court to stand in to deal with this fact that the District of Columbia only lets people with special dangers and not regular dangers carry guns. I think that's where this is going to probably have to end in ultimately, and that's good. That's our government working, and that's our courts. Let's see what happens. So, on that note, it was really great to be out here. I really enjoyed meeting all of you, and something I've written my book, and I've said to a lot of you before, but I always want to reemphasize this point. I don't call myself pro-gun. I'm not. A lot of you've seen me at the range sometimes, but I'm probably more likely to be at an exercise class than at the range or shopping. But I'm obviously trained regularly. But I don't call myself pro-gun. I call myself pro-Second Amendment, because a gun is a tool, and this fight that we're all in, this fight is for freedom, the freedom for the Bill of Rights. Thank you.